a fight we will lead at a UK-hosted summit next year. And AI is not hypothetically making lives better, it is already saving them. At Imperial College, a new AI stethoscope detects major heart conditions in seconds. In our National Health Service, AI mammogram trials double the speed of diagnosis. And AI research tools are unlocking new drug combos to fight cancer. On the horizon, the promise of fusion power, powering limitless servers through quantum computing, enabling ever stronger AI, could unleash ever more advanced biotech. This is the defining opportunity of our generation, and we must run towards it with hope. I believe in this promise. I believe in our UN values, which is why this promise must now be shared. We are witnessing a truly historic surge in investment in AI. This investment promises outstanding productivity gains, and with it growth of historic proportions. Yet while this promise may well be diffuse, for now it remains concentrated. But there's not just possibility on the technological frontier. There are profound challenges as well, as AI is being used to consolidate repression, fuel disinformation, empower criminals across the internet. Authoritarian states, notably Russia, are manipulating large-scale, large language models so that chatbots answer in the voice of their propaganda across the world. Organized crime is using AI to supercharge their scams, deceiving victims on an unprecedented scale. This is the truth. AI can empower freedom, or it can entrench repression. AI can empower truth, or it can entrench lies. AI can empower law, or it can empower crime. Only by cooperation together can we set artificial intelligence on the right millennia-defining course. So my question is this: how can we most effectively share the glittering prizes of this new era across our global community? Well, this is how. We must invest. Invest, invest. We must partner, partner. Because without a concerted effort, we risk a world of ever deeper inequality, where the benefits of this technology fail to reach those who need it most. That revolution in healthcare, that revolution in education, that revolution in opportunity, this we must share. This is the world we face, and we take it and its challenges as it is, but never lose sight of the world as it can be. This is why our approach to foreign policy is one of progressive realism, patiently advancing progress through pragmatism and persistence. I see this in the United Nations as it approaches the technological frontier. I salute the Secretary General for championing the Global Digital Compact, which embodies both progress and realism. And this is why I commend the new independent international scientific panel on AI, which will provide evidence-based assessments to all. And I welcome the new global dialogue on AI governance. It is in this spirit of progressive realism that the UK champions AI as a bridge builder across the Atlantic, across the Commonwealth, and across continents, seeking everywhere to share its extraordinary potential. This is why we invest so heavily in the AI Security Institute, with more dedicated researchers than anywhere else in the world, and this is why we launched OpenBind and its gigantic data set. And this is why we champion AI for development, working with 10 African partners, creating AI ecosystems that empower thousands of communities to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And this drives our digital access programs, which seek to narrow the technological divide for millions. I have seen this happening with my own eyes. I've been so moved to see in Africa, the continent of my ancestors, the young entrepreneurs using artificial intelligence to launch and scale so many businesses that I know will astonish the world, like the UK-funded startup Vinsight, supported by our Assistive Technologies program, which is using its AI-powered app to help thousands of blind Nigerian students read, learn, and live more independently. This is the promise of tech, the promise of growth, the promise of a better world. A better tomorrow turns on one pivotal question. Can we seize the potential in the technological revolution? Can we commit to forging AI as a force for freedom, prosperity, and human dignity? I believe we can together, and together we must. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice and Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Beate Meindl-Reisinger, Federal Minister for European and International Affairs of Austria.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. As the Austrian Foreign Minister, it is both truly an honor and a profound responsibility to address this assembly today. Yet, I am not only a foreign minister and, by the way, a party leader, I'm also a mother of 3 daughters. When I reflected about why I'm coming to New York to participate in the General Assembly, it became clear to me. The values of the United Nations are the very same values that my husband and I try to pass down to our children. That conflict and dispute can and must be resolved by mediation. That every human being, regardless of their offspring, sex, religion, or race, deserves dignity and owns the same rights. That rules have to be followed by everyone, and big problems can only be solved together, and that every one of us has the responsibility to act not only in their own interest, but to work for a better future for everyone. I suppose that all parents around the globe share a common wish for their children to grow up with the promise of a bright future, especially now, especially in critical times like these, especially in times when these values and simple rules are threatened by disrespect. Madam President, Excellencies, when I listen to my oldest daughter, a teenager, I sometimes get the feeling that weighs really heavy on me, namely that for our children, for my children's generation, the future does not seem brighter than the present. We all can sense that there are fundamental fears of war and conflict, fears of climate change, of radicalization, of fundamentalism, and the division of our societies. That burdens me deeply as a mother, but also as a leader. I believe that the most powerful and most important promise leaders can make is to do everything in their power to ensure that our future is at least a little better than the present. Yet today we cannot close our eyes to the gap between this aspiration and the harsh reality we live in. For example, in Gaza, where devastation, starvation, and despair have reached terrible proportions. For Austria, it is clear the attacks of Hamas on Israel on October 7th were horrible and beyond imaginable brutality. They must be condemned by all of us. We have said it from day one and will continue to do so. Hamas must immediately and unconditionally free all hostages, end its rule in Gaza and hand over its weapons. At the same time, nothing justifies the devastating humanitarian catastrophe we are witnessing in Gaza. Civilians must be protected at all times. There is no justification for violating international law, including international humanitarian law. Austria is, not only because of our own historical responsibility, a friend of the people of Israel, but the actions and decisions of the Israeli government break my heart. This war must end now. The hostages must be freed and humanitarian aid must reach the suffering civilians in Gaza as soon as possible. Our vision, the Austrian vision, is clear: a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in the Middle East. 2 states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within recognized borders. Austria's support for the 2-state solution is not just words. We have supported the Palestinian Authority for many decades. At that point in the future, when this step can make the most meaningful contribution to peace, and when the right conditions have been met, we will also recognize Palestine as a state. We welcome President Abbas' condemnation of the October 7th attacks, his call to free the hostages, the prospect of elections, and his demand to disarm Hamas. We thank all those who took a huge effort to end this war and bring solutions for peace and security to this region. These are steps towards peace, and Austria will work with all partners to turn them into reality. Madam President, Excellencies, we all see the basic principles of the Charter challenged in Ukraine, where Russia has been waging an illegal and unprovoked war of aggression against its neighbor. A very brutal war with horrific numbers of dead and wounded, soldiers and civilians. We support US and all efforts to end the war through high-level diplomacy. Since the beginning of the war, and especially since March, many initiatives have been launched to end this war. Ukraine showed several times that they are ready for peace. But instead, Russia continues its attacks on cities and villages, on schools, on hospitals and kindergartens. Russia even escalates now towards the EU and NATO countries, and this is unacceptable. Austria calls urgently for an immediate ceasefire as a precondition for genuine talks to end this war. Russia cannot simply talk peace during the day and bomb during the night. And it is absolutely clear that it is up to Ukraine and Europe to decide on our hopefully common future and security architecture. But Ukraine and Gaza are not alone. In Sudan, civilians face massacres while a humanitarian catastrophe unfolds on an unparalleled scale. In Haiti, gang violence and organized crime hold an entire nation hostage. In Afghanistan, women and girls are denied their most basic human rights. Against the backdrop of rising insecurity and armed conflicts, countries are now heavily investing in security and defense, also in Europe, also in Austria. We all have the duty to protect our citizens. This is necessary as we are confronted with the biggest war on our continent since 1945. But let us not fool ourselves. Growing nuclear arsenals or uncontrolled autonomous weapons systems will not make our world a safer one. While we all must ensure the safety and security of our populations, we must never give up on international humanitarian law, and we must ban weapons which kill randomly. Excellencies, today we face growing disregard of the UN Charter itself, a rising tide of coercion and unilateralism, a dangerous erosion of trust. The United Nations were born out of the ashes of war and the promise of never again. Does the UN still live up to this promise? Is the UN still fit for purpose? What we do today matters. We must not fail our ancestors. We must not fail our population. We must not fail our children. We must therefore ensure our activeness, an active world community and effective United Nations that can deliver. Austria is ready to do its part to fulfill the UN's promise, to engage in open and fair dialogue, to build true partnerships, to rebuild trust that has been eroded by reckless actions of one country without considerations of others. It is about time to rebuild partnerships. It is about time to rebuild trust. That is why Austria presented its candidacy for the UN Security Council for 27-28 already back in 2011. We strongly hope to count on your valuable support at the elections in June next year. Why should you support us? Austria is a rather small country and a military neutral one. We are a reliable host country, proud host country, of one of the UN headquarters in Vienna and support the Secretary General's reform efforts. Many negotiations in Vienna took place that have bridged divides and saved lives. We know that small countries depend on the rule of law, on diplomacy, transparency, and inclusiveness. That's why we will serve the entire international community if elected. We champion international law, the protection of civilians, disarmament, and UN peacekeeping. More than 100,000 Austrians have served as peacekeepers around the world since the 1960s. We are a reliable development partner and make our contribution to the enormous challenge of climate change. And no, denial will not help us to adapt to this challenge. This is why Austria is proud to co-chair the UN Climate Security Mechanism this year. Excellencies, the people of the world, our populations, the children of the world, rely on us. They trust us to protect peace, prosperity, stability, and healthy United Nations that delivers answers to global challenges. 80 years ago, our predecessors gave the world a charter and a promise for a better future. Let us renew this promise and work hard so that the future is better than the present. Thank you very much.
I thank the Federal Minister for European and International Affairs of Austria. I now give the floor to His Excellency Juan Ramón de la Fuente Ramírez, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico.
Señora.
Madam President, Excellencies, the time of women has come, and Mexico has made this very clear. Through the landslide election of Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo as the first female president of our country. It's an honour for me to participate in this assembly representing her, and being the voice of a government that is delivering the transformation of the public life of Mexico. I come from a country that was born in the wisdom, bravery and dignity of its original peoples, with a rich political history of extraordinary heroes and heroines who built a free, independent and sovereign country. Now, we must also say that we are becoming an ever more prosperous country with shared prosperity. The Mexican people are a fraternal people both within and beyond our borders. We have shown this being an active and responsible member of the United Nations community under the premise of defending the dignity and the rights of individuals and nations who love peace, with full respect for the sovereign equality of states. The historic time that we are living through in Mexico, under the leadership of our first female president, is rooted in a vision that we have called Mexican humanism. The trail blazed over the last 7 years is a clear one and has a universal vocation, that is, to build a society based on democracy, freedom, equality, and shared prosperity for the benefit of everyone, putting the poor first. The guiding pillar of this project is a vision of justice, full recognition of the dignity of people, and inclusive social development without discrimination. It is a project that establishes a separation between political and economic power that moves towards achieving a moral economy that seeks coordination and cooperation with external actors and doesn't accept any type of subordination, because national sovereignty is non-negotiable. This new way of doing politics has given voice and agency to those who were historically marginalized and forgotten: women, girls, indigenous peoples and persons of African descent, youth, LGBT plus persons and the elderly. And the results speak for themselves. The UN itself has recognized that 13.5 million Mexicans were raised out of poverty thanks to a policy of labor justice and social programs. Inequality is being reduced, peace is being built and violence contained, justice has reached indigenous peoples, there is democracy, freedoms, plurality and the right to dissent. Justice is being transformed, and today an indigenous person is president of the Supreme Court of Justice of our nation. We have the largest reforestation program in the world, with 1 billion trees planted. Girls, boys and youth are being included in social programs and have access to school. Elderly adults have a guaranteed and universal pension, and women are exercising power. These are some of the good things that we have achieved in this fourth transformation of public life in Mexico, and that deserve to be proudly proclaimed loud and clear from this podium, from this rostrum. As members of the international community, the challenges that we face are huge. Poverty persists in a world of exorbitant wealth. There are countries that spend more servicing their debt than they do in investments in health and education for their peoples, and expenditure on arms has tripled, has grown at tripled the rate of the global economy, just to mention a few. And the diagnostic has always been clear: the arms race, the immoral concentration of wealth, violations of international law and of human rights are the fuel that fuel the flames of war and violence. Mexico has not forgotten the lessons of history. 80 years ago, we participated in founding the United Nations, convinced of the moral obligation that we have as a nation to contribute to avoiding the scourge of wars. It is not a coincidence that many of the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter are reflected in the constitutional principles of our foreign policy. The self-determination of peoples, the peaceful settlement of disputes, prohibiting the threat or the use of force, the legal equality of states, cooperation for development and the defence of human rights. Without seeking to be exhaustive, please allow me to share some of the premises that can contribute to getting the international community back on track. Number one, the world needs a moral economy of well-being. It's necessary to mobilise regional coalitions around well-being in order to deliver effective cooperation for development that acknowledges that fighting poverty is the investment that gives the best return, both financially and socially speaking. An international financial architecture that includes criteria of collective well-being and trade that is grounded in clear rules with shared benefits between peoples. Number two, peace. Peace is built from the bottom up. Ensuring well-being involves addressing the structural causes of violence. Solving conflicts often begins in the home. It continues in education and then in decent jobs with fair wages and social security that enables the inclusion of the whole of the social fabric. The international community must take a look with a more critical and innovative spirit at what youth today have as alternatives. Similarly, it's the role of the international community to put an end to the arms race, not only when it comes to nuclear weapons, but also the illicit trafficking of firearms and the spiral of expenditure on arms that is feeding poverty and exacerbating conflict. In response to the staggering proliferation of weapons, it is necessary to respond with politics, mediation, diplomacy, law and dialogue. The United Nations must play a much more active role in the prevention and the solving of these conflicts. Multilateralism must become again the space where disputes are settled. And this leads us to our third premise. Number three, it's necessary to uphold international law alongside human rights. If we really want to avoid the proliferation of conflicts that have an impact on the lives and the dignity of people, we must respect international law, including international human rights law and international humanitarian law. Whether it's in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, or in any other part of the world, war is taking an intolerable toll, and it threatens triggering an even larger escalation of conflict that could even be profoundly destructive for the whole world. The wars in Gaza, in Ukraine, and in all the other places that they're taking place must end now. We will not tire in insisting on the urgent appeal for a ceasefire, to always achieve a negotiated solution with the participation of all parties directly involved. There can be no negotiated solution if any of the parties are excluded. The solution must be a diplomatic one, otherwise it will be hardly achievable. Mexico will always advocate for the peaceful settlement of disputes, and that's why we reject sanctions and trade embargoes that only harm the well-being of peoples and do not contribute to building regions of peace or prosperity. we reiterate unambiguously our historic position against the embargo on Cuba and our appeal to remove this country from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism, state sponsors of terrorism. Respecting international law is safeguarding peace. It's the antidote to a logic of power that makes the weakest nations even more vulnerable. In the words of our Benemérito de las Américas, our eminent Benito Juárez Garcia, everything through reason and law, and nothing by force. Madam President, the struggle for justice is rooted in the conviction that all people are equal before the law. Compelled by fraternity to understand each other and to respect each other as equals in dignity and in rights. Mexico has a tireless commitment to human rights, to freedoms and to non-discrimination in the world. We condemn classism, racism, and all forms of discrimination, including discrimination based on sexual diversity or gender identity. We particularly reject the criminalisation of people who, for whatever reason, have been forced to leave their homes and forced to migrate, whether it's to seek refuge or to escape conditions of injustice or poverty. For us, migrants are people with rights, who care for their families and who contribute with their efforts to improving and strengthening their host communities. It's only by understanding the phenomenon and addressing its structural causes that we will be able to move towards a framework of global and regional collaboration that will enable us to move towards a safer and more orderly mobility. Let there be no doubt, Mexico will not tire in ensuring the attention to and protection of Mexican nationals who are outside of our country and those that deserve all of our support and assistance. In this framework of justice and rights, we are including the fight of women and for gender equality, because despite the progress there are still gaps and violence against women in the world that are wrenching away freedom from girls, young women and women in all of their diversity. 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Programme of Action, the diagnostics and the roadmap are clear, and we invite all nations to mobilise to accelerate the progress towards gender equality. In my country, the transformation of consciences has been intrinsically linked to the fight for gender equality. Today in Mexico, we are seeing gender parity prevail in the legislative and judicial branches of government, in public policies. We are including a strict gender perspective, and that has been enshrined in our constitution. Madam President, 80 years since the United Nations was created, we must recognise the grave dilemma that it faces, and this is something that can not be delayed. The United Nations must assert itself once again as an institution that not only helps to contain war and prevents pandemics, but also shapes narratives that lead to public policies for human dignity. We believe that the United Nations must go back to its purposes and its principles and return to its fundamental pillars, which are the maintenance of international peace and security, sustainable development, and the protection and promotion of human rights. It is necessary to get back to these objectives, and everything must revolve around this, from working on the budget to reviewing the thousands of mandates that we have given to the Secretariat, many of which really are not that useful today. The legitimacy of the United Nations will depend increasingly more on its ability to respond to the grave challenges that the world faces. We trust that the next Secretary General, who we hope will be a woman from our region, will accelerate progress
acelere
will accelerate the transformation process that we set forth with the objective of ensuring peace and justice, as well as the well-being and freedom of people, the sustainability of the planet, and shared prosperity. In Mexico, Excellencies, colleagues, Madam President, in Mexico, the time of women has come, and it's going very well for us. We think that at the United Nations also the time for women has come. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le ministre.
I thank Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Olivier Nduhungirehe, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Rwanda.
Your Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the 80th General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of Delegation, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Allow me to begin by congratulating Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock on her election as President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Philemon Yang, the outgoing President, for his work and dedicated service to multilateralism. Rwanda extends its gratitude to Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his comprehensive report on the work of the United Nations aimed at improving its efficiency. In this regard, Rwanda has formally expressed interest in hosting UN agencies as part of our shared commitment to a cost-effective and decentralized UN system. We reiterate our support to the work of the United Nations and the Secretary General, particularly in advancing peace and security and drive progress on sustainable development goals. Excellencies, this year, the United Nations turned 80. This journey has not been without challenges. Fast-changing realities, including economic shocks and the legitimate aspirations of regions long denied a voice, compel us to quickly adapt to make the UN fit for purpose. That is why Rwanda strongly supports reforms, especially of the Security Council. The composition of this body does not reflect current realities. Africa is a 1.2 billion people strong continent where most of the conflict of the Security Council's agenda reside. Therefore, it cannot remain excluded from permanent membership. Excellencies, the United Nations development pillar remains central to advancing peace, prosperity, and dignity for all. We commend the UN development system and its partners for their tireless efforts in supporting countries to address pressing development challenges, from poverty eradication to climate resilience, and in driving forward the ambition of the 2030 Agenda. This 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development embodies our collective aspirations for a just, inclusive, and prosperous world where no one is left behind. Rwanda remains firmly committed to its full implementation, recognizing that connectivity, innovation, and inclusive development are indispensable drivers of progress. Despite global challenges such as the existential threat of climate change and widening technological inequalities, Rwanda has taken bold steps to align national priorities with the SDGs. These efforts demonstrate that development, connectivity, and environmental stewardship can move forward hand in hand. Yet, the persistence of unequal access to finance, technology, and markets threatens to widen the gap between those with means and those without. In this context, solidarity among nations through development cooperation has contributed to bridging development gaps. However, we believe that it is time to transition from aid to trade, enabling developing countries to become self-reliant in a win-win partnership. Mr. President, Excellencies, Rwanda regrets the politicization of development cooperation, which is used by some development partners for partisan political reasons and interests. Let me recall that every nation is sovereign and cannot be forced to choose between its security and development. Development aid must serve as a tool for solidarity and progress, not as a weapon of coercion. Excellencies, the history of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda called on us to become global advocates for a peacekeeping that always puts civilians first. We pay tribute to the men and women who have worn the blue helmet and who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in the service of humanity. Their legacy is written in the history of the United Nations and lives on through the lives they helped save. But peacekeeping must be judged by its results. For the sake of the millions who look to the UN for protection, we must ensure that peacekeeping remains true to its purpose. That is why Rwanda champions robust peacekeeping, the responsibility to protect, and the implementation of the 2015 Kigali Principles on the protection of civilians. Moreover, Rwanda has led calls for sustainable peace financing both in Africa and globally. Among milestone achievements is the revitalization of the African Union Peace Fund, which now mobilizes over $400 million. As a direct result, the Security Council decided to finance 3/4 of African Union peace operations for the first time. Excellencies, beyond the UN, Rwanda contributes to peace support operations on a bilateral basis in the Central African Republic and Mozambique in an effort to promote South-South cooperation and Pan-African solidarity. Major progress has been recorded in both countries in the restoration of state authority, capacity building of local security forces, and the fight against terrorism. Excellencies, I may recall that the United Nations was established to spare succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Yet, 80 years on, conflicts continue to erupt across every continent. Rwanda firmly maintains that for most of those conflicts, lasting peace cannot be achieved through military means. We have consistently held that only genuine, good faith dialogue offers a sustainable path towards global peace. However, peacekeeping alone is not enough. Too often, we deplore relapse into conflict because its root causes were not properly addressed. Prevention, mediation, and effective peace building must be our first resort. This lesson is particularly urgent for the Great Lakes region of Africa. The current conflict in Eastern DRC is not new. It is rooted in decades of bad governance, marginalization and persecution of minorities, genocide ideology, and a persistent colonial legacy. Rwanda believes that peace in Eastern DRC is in everyone's best interest. Our goal has always been, and will remain, the security and well-being of Rwandans and the people of our region. In June this year, Rwanda and the DRC signed a peace agreement in Washington. It provides for a comprehensive framework encompassing security, political, and economic components. This achievement was made possible thanks to the strong leadership of His Excellency President Donald Trump of the United States and of His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar, whose vision for peace and prosperity in our region, Rwanda fully shares. We also acknowledge the vital role played by African-led initiatives, notably the joint EAC-SADC process, supported by the African Union mediation, for their efforts in favor of peace. Nevertheless, since the signing of this peace agreement, progress has been moving slowly. While promising meetings are taking place in Washington to implement the June peace agreement, the situation on the ground remains deeply troubling. The DRC's renewed militarization, coupled with its continued collaboration with genocidal and UN-sanctioned armed groups, such as the DRC-backed FDLR and Wazalendo militias, and the deployment of attack drones and fighter jets against civilian populations, particularly the Banyamulenge and other Congolese Tutsi, underscore the gravity of the crisis. This goes against the letter and spirit of the Washington Peace Agreement. Additionally, this coalition is supported by foreign forces, including mercenaries, in clear violation of the 1977 OAU Convention and the 1989 UN Convention against the use of mercenaries. Rwanda condemns these developments and calls on the DRC to reject the military solution and implement in good faith the Washington Peace Agreement, which is a golden opportunity to end this conflict that has lasted for far too long. Excellency, since 1999, the United Nations has maintained a robustly mandated peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, named MONUSCO, to help address the crisis. Yet, despite its efforts, the mission has not succeeded in halting the proliferation of armed groups, especially the eradication of the DRC-backed FDLR. Instead, MONUSCO has ended up working alongside a military coalition that includes the FDLR, going against more than 20 Security Council resolutions calling for the neutralization of that group. There is an urgent need to review the legal conformity of MONUSCO's mandate. Of particular concern to Rwanda is the emergence of Wazalendo militia, armed and supported by the DRC government, which are committing countless abuses, including burning down whole villages of Congolese Tutsi, lynching and burning alive civilians and military officers, as well as arming children for ethnic cleansing. Their brutality, methods, and ideology bear an alarming resemblance to that of the genocidal militia of 1994 in Rwanda. Strong action is needed to put an end to this dangerous development before it is too late. Excellencies, human rights are a major pillar of the United Nations. Rwanda rose from the ashes of the genocide in 1994 by placing human dignity, unity, and accountability at the center of our governance. We thank the United Nations for establishing the International Day of Reflection of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, commemorated every April 7th. We also thank the Secretariat and the many member states who have established genocide memorials on their soil as a lasting pledge to never forget. Equally, we commend the work of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the residual mechanism for prosecuting genocide perpetrators. However, Rwanda is deeply concerned about the persistence of genocide ideology and related crimes in Eastern DRC under the watch of the international community and the UN itself. We call on the international community to not turn a blind eye once more for what is clear to see. The targeting, persecution, and massacre of Congolese Tutsi, including the Banyamulenge community, amounts to crimes against humanity which have all the early warning signs of a genocide. Indeed, genocide follows a pattern. It follows clear stages. It is not an umbrella term. It is defined by international law. Genocide targets a specific group for who they are, with the intent to exterminate them as such. In this regard, no amount of calculated cynicism can rewrite the truth and recast perpetrators as victims or victims as perpetrators. These are denialist behaviors often deployed by perpetrators. In the same vein, no claims from a government arming a genocidal militia will change the facts of history. Financing and providing weapons to a group with a proven genocidal record and ongoing intent is nothing less than complicity in the crime itself. I must say that if there are crimes in the DRC committed for economic gains, they have clear names. Those are corruption, bad governance, and the embezzlement of public funds. Mr. President, Excellencies, I wish to conclude by reaffirming that Rwanda stands ready to work alongside all member states to ensure that the United Nations remains a force for peace, justice, and sustainable development. While the challenges and solutions for multilateralism are clear, it is political will that must guide us today to build a UN fit for purpose. Together, we must build an organization capable of addressing the needs of billions across the globe, tackling human rights abuses, climate change, and responding to an increasingly interconnected world for successive generations to come. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I wish to thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Rwanda. I now invite Her Excellency Maria Gabriela Sommerfeld Rosero, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador, to address the Assembly.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, on the 80th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations Charter, Ecuador honours with respect and renewed commitment its status as a founding member of this organisation. What was born out of hope for peace upon the ruins of the Second World War has become the most ambitious project of international cooperation in history. A system of norms, institutions, principles, purposes, and universal values geared towards protecting human dignity, preventing violence, and driving development. 80 years ago, states chose cooperation over disputes, peace over war. My presence here at this Assembly is an opportunity to reiterate before the international community that Ecuador will continue to prioritise cooperation between states, because it is only by working together that we will be able to ensure a future of peace, security and prosperity for our peoples. Therefore, the foreign policy of Ecuador supports multilateralism, which is the model that enables international cooperation to be possible in order to address global challenges and to achieve common goals. Madam President, multilateralism needs to change in order to respond to the current demands of peoples and to confront new threats. Ecuador believes that the concept of international peace and security must be broadened and include the fight against transnational organised crime, which is a phenomenon that undermines governability, that feeds corruption, that perpetuates violence, and that erodes the perspectives of progress. Indeed, it causes consequences that are similar to traditional armed conflicts in the economic, political and social realms. We're not talking about local gangs here, but rather international networks and logistic chains that move thousands of tons of drugs, that exploit illegal mining and that traffic weapons, people and even human organs. In light of the rise of the many acts of violence and narco-terrorism, the government of Ecuador recognised the existence of a non-international armed conflict in January 2024 and designated several of these groups as terrorists. We have deployed huge efforts and resources in order to safeguard our security and to put our citizens first. We are doing this by adopting programmes focused on the prevention of youth violence, including the recruitment, use and utilisation of boys, girls and adolescents. At the same time, we are implementing public policies to attract investment and jobs in order to ensure sustainable security. I wish to insist on the fact that Ecuador, without having sought this out, but due to the fact that we are very close to the main producers of cocaine in the world, is on the front line of the battle against transnational organised crime and is waging an existential war against narco-terrorism. Milestones in the fight of Ecuador against transnational organised crime and narco-terrorism include the seizure of 295 tonnes of illicit drugs in 2024, as well as the decision to call on friendly countries to provide their support in different areas of this confrontation, because given the potential of joint military operations fully respecting the constitutional framework. The Ecuadorian government has called a national and democratic debate on foreign military bases, by way of a referendum that will take place in November next, providing strategic areas that can serve to help us to control and monitor criminal activities in order to achieve peace and international peace and security. This referendum will be coupled with a call for a constituent assembly that will be tasked with drafting a new fundamental charter that will contribute to defeating narco-terrorism and lead us inexorably down the path of prosperity and social peace. Madam President, on a regional level, Ecuador has established and what spearheaded the establishment of the resolutive plan of action as a strategic response of the Andean community to the illicit trafficking of drugs and transnational organised crime. On a multilateral level, Ecuador has spearheaded initiatives such as the presidency of the Latin American Community of Security and Intelligence, where we have promoted the updating of the operational action plans and organised the Latin American Security Summit, consolidating strategic alliances with the European Union and Ameripol. We agree that transnational organised crime and narco-terrorism are global scourges that know no borders, and no country can act against them alone. It's therefore essential to coordinate our efforts to reach cooperation agreements with countries and with international bodies that include financial assistance and technological equipment. Madam President, over the last 8 years that the UN has been in existence, it has been shown that lasting peace can only be built upon solid foundations: security, development, and human rights. These three pillars, which are independent and indivisible, represent the pillars of the international order and multilateralism that are currently seeing cracks in them that are compromising their stability. Indeed, today multilateralism is being called into question, and rightly, because it hasn't been able to address the contemporary conflicts and challenges effectively. Ecuador advocates for a more innovative, inclusive and representative multilateralism that takes account of the realities of countries, in particular those of the developing world, that promotes the equality of men and women, and that finally opens up a space for youth in decision-making. It's essential to strengthen the respect of the fundamental principles of international law enshrined in the United Nations Charter, that is the bedrock of this organisation and whose strength depends on our adherence to its spirit and letter. Abandoning it would lead us back to a time in which the only source of law was force. It is therefore our role to reform it and update it, so that it can respond to the current challenges we face on a global level, so that precisely we can strengthen these principles. In summary, this institution is called to support the evolution and accompany the evolution of human beings and of the planet, to address technology changes and new challenges. Madam President, human mobility is yet another of the most complex challenges of our time. Ecuador, which is a country of origin, transit and destination and refuge for migrants, reaffirms its commitment to safe, regular and orderly migration, convinced that managing it properly can contribute to sustainable development. Ecuador strongly rejects irregular, unsafe and disorderly human mobility, because this often responds to the interests of transnational organised crime groups that can also be transnational in nature. Emerging technologies, in particular artificial intelligence, offer up unprecedented opportunities for human progress. However, they also offer up significant risks for security, equity and human rights. Ecuador believes that it's essential to move towards multilateral and ethical governance of these tools that would guarantee their inclusive access to them, that would avoid new digital gaps and that would ensure their use is guided by the common good. Climate change and the loss of biodiversity threaten our stability and development. As a mega-diverse country, Ecuador advocates for more environmental financing, for technology transfer, and for international support for the conservation of unique ecosystems like the Amazon and the Galapagos Islands, which are the treasure of humanity. Financing for development is another great challenge. The international financial architecture must respond to the needs of developing countries, in particular those that are classified as middle high-income countries. The exclusive use of GDP per capita, which is limiting and limited, does not reflect our reality, nor does it reflect our vulnerabilities. We require more comprehensive indicators that include multidimensional poverty, structural inequality, and climate resilience, as access to concessional resources and international cooperation are not unfairly undermined. Ecuador supports the use of sustainable financial instruments such as green and thematic bonds and promotes the creation of new financing mechanisms. Madam President, youth of Ecuador and of the world, I'm proud to represent a young people. Ecuador is a country of more than 18 million inhabitants in which youth represent around 40% of our population. The government of Ecuador and President Daniel Noboa are focused on providing them with opportunities that did not exist in the past. The time of youth has come. if we provide them opportunities, we can promote and provide better attention to all citizens. It is a positive and multiplying effect. For us, the youth embody the priority of all priorities. Today, youth see in the new Ecuador a country of opportunities and progress, in which there is a firm commitment to eradicating corruption and impunity, as well as the old politics and ideological struggles that perpetuate a status quo that is unsustainable and that benefits only a few people. The new Ecuador is moving with stability and responsibility on an ambitious path of productive transformation as well as social and institutional transformation towards a new chapter in our development model, involving efforts that include the diversification of our energy mix, that include the diversification of our productive mix. The current global economic environment that is ever more complex and demanding, marked by the volatility of the markets, geopolitical tensions, uncertainty in the supply chain, and rapid technological changes, require us to adapt rapidly and in an agile manner. We are fostering a competitive economic environment, generating openness to business and providing attractive opportunities for foreign investment. Several factors foster investment and business in Ecuador. A large range of natural resources, our strategic location in South America, the economic stability provided by us using the United States dollar as our national currency, and our condition as a mega-diverse country with an extremely rich cultural heritage. Our risk indicator as a country continues on its downward trend, and yesterday was at 701 points, which is the lowest level over recent years. Our economy grew by 3.9% in the first half of the year, achieving growth of, heralding growth for around 5% for the second half of the year. And as for the security environment, well, the economy is improving even with the challenges that we still face. In July 2025, we saw 38.6% of decent jobs. In other words, 282,000 more Ecuadorians are benefiting from a decent job compared to 2024. So that is a change of 3.7% compared to July 2024. These achievements are also to do with the laws that President Daniel Noboa and his cabinet have drafted and put to the National Assembly that seek to safeguard peace, transparency, and the fight against terrorism and crime, and also providing jobs, economic stability, and creating social programs and opportunities for development. Madam President, the 80th anniversary of the UN is a turning point. On this historic commemoration of the United Nations, I invite you to adopt a creative vision like the one that we had in 1945 that's able to renew and strengthen this institutionality grounded in an ethical model of democracy and changing to adapt to contemporary challenges. Global challenges such as transnational organised crime, narco-terrorism, migration and climate change require more multilateralism, more cooperation and more collective action. Ecuador reaffirms its commitment to the defence of peace and security, human rights and development. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Maria Malmer Stenergaard, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden.
Je remercie
Mr. President, Excellencies, 80 years ago, nations came together. It was a bold act of faith. Faith in multilateralism, the rule of law, and the shared responsibility to save future generations from the devastation of war. But as we gather here, the world and our organization, the United Nations, are facing the risk of failing. Leaders of several nations are choosing conflict over cooperation. Around the world, we are witnessing grave violations of the rules and principles that we have all agreed to. For too many, peace is fragile, justice abstract, and dignity denied. There is so much wasted potential. The UN was founded to curb aggression and the arbitrary exercise of power by the strong against the weak. That vision remains as valid today as it was then. Mr. President, it is not only the UN that turns 80 this year, it happens to be 80 years since Astrid Lindgren published her first book about the strongest girl in the world, Pippi Longstocking, a strong-willed girl who believed everything was possible. Pippi has inspired generations of children, especially girls, to believe that strength and independence are not confined by expectation or tradition. I have never tried that before, so I should definitely be able to do it. Although not a direct quote, it captures the spirit of Pippi. Let us use the coincidence of anniversaries as a reminder that even in the face of unprecedented challenges, we must approach the impossible with boldness and resolve. Mr. President, Sweden is a committed defender of international humanitarian law, principles that safeguard human dignity even in the darkest of times, and they must be upheld without exception. We cannot be deterred by a few states' disregard for our charter. This is our time to act and to defend these fundamental rules and principles for us and for future generations. We need an efficient UN that defends the right of every state, big or small, to uphold its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. We need a strong UN that helps member states deliver on their commitments to respect, protect, and promote the human rights of every individual. And we need a focused UN. The UN must remain true to its core, securing peace, advancing human rights, driving sustainable development, and providing humanitarian relief. Mr. President, as a steadfast partner and major donor to the United Nations, Sweden remains committed to addressing global development challenges and to humanitarian efforts to provide protection and life-saving assistance. Sweden is also a strong supporter of UN peacekeeping and peace-building efforts. We actively take part in the Peace-Building Commission. We chair the Liberia configuration, and we have contributed substantially to the Peace-Building Fund since its creation. The Security Council must evolve to better reflect today's global realities. Sweden supports a balanced expansion of the Security Council by adding permanent and non-permanent seats, including African countries. We need to act together based on our shared principles and common goals. These include our commitments under the Pact for the Future adopted last year. Looking ahead, we will seek a candidate for the next UN Secretary General who leads the way and builds on important reform initiatives. And let me be clear, Sweden's choice is always merit-based. But isn't it strange that for 80 years no woman has been elected, especially if the selection is based on merit? Mr. President, in a world in which armed conflicts are multiplying, we must not allow injustice to go unpunished. Accountability is critical to uphold our international rules-based order. the integrity, independence, and impartiality of our international legal system, including the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, must be protected. When I think of accountability, I think of little Angelina. You have probably seen the picture of her celebrating her 2nd birthday next to a giant teddy bear. Angelina never got to celebrate her 3rd birthday. She was born during Russia's war, and she died from a Russian missile. Little Angelina and her mother were killed in one of Russia's deadliest attacks on Ukraine in Kiev in August this year. The only one saved from the rubble was her giant teddy bear. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a blatant violation of the very foundation of this organization. A permanent member of the Security Council has brutally invaded another UN member state. This cannot be tolerated. Holding Russia accountable is essential for all of us to deter further aggression and to preserve the global order. From the very outset, Ukraine has sought a just and lasting peace based on international law, including the UN Charter. Sweden remains unwavering in its support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Mr. President, on October 7, 2023, Hamas carried out the worst mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust. Men, women, and children were brutally murdered and kidnapped by Hamas terrorists. And when the music faded at the Nova Festival, so did the lives of young, peace-loving people. They were raped, killed, and taken hostage. It was truly a painful reminder of how dark the world can be. The hostages are being held in appalling conditions by Hamas. More pressure must be put on Hamas to immediately release them, and Hamas must never have a place in the future governance of Palestine. The war in Gaza has led to suffering beyond imagination. We are reminded daily of the painful desperation inside Gaza. The offensive against Gaza City is worsening an already catastrophic situation. Parts of Gaza are now officially in the grips of famine. This cannot go on. Israel has a right to defend itself, but that right must be exercised in accordance with international law. And the way the Israeli government is waging its war is unacceptable. The UN and other humanitarian actors must be allowed to work safely in all parts of Gaza. Humanitarian space must be protected and aid should never be politicized. Increased pressure on the Israeli government to change its course and meet its obligations according to international law is urgently needed. Sweden welcomes international efforts for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is in the interest of all states to not only bring this war to an end, but to ensure a sustainable two-state solution for a better future for all, both Israelis and Palestinians. Mr. President, the situation in Sudan is deeply alarming. It is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world and not given enough attention. Full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access and immediate ceasefire and negotiations, ensuring a return to civilian rule, are urgently required. Conflicts all over the world are wasting human potential. Every conflict tears families apart, disrupts education, and silences voices. The cost is immeasurable. Mr. President, authoritarian regimes challenge democracy, rule of law, and gender equality. Sadly, resistance against women's and girls' rights is on the rise. Sweden is honored to serve as President of the UN Executive Board this year. Gender equality is too often framed as a women's issue, which is a profound misunderstanding. Equality is not only a value we should aspire to, it is a driver of progress. Strengthening women's and girls' rights is not only the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do, because we know that where women prosper, societies prosper. Equal access to education, work and resources transforms communities. Economically empowered women invest more in their families, leading to better health, education, and overall quality in life for future generations. Societies that include women in peace building are more likely to enjoy sustainable peace. We must stand firm against those who seek to roll back freedoms. We must push back the pushback. Everyone has the right to live safely and freely, regardless of gender, religion or beliefs, skin color, or whom they love. Sweden will always defend the equal rights and dignity of every human being. Mr. President, the crisis of our time, armed conflicts, climate change, extreme poverty, demand urgent collective action. But public aid alone is not enough. To achieve our goals, we need to mobilize finance from every source, not least private capital. We must use synergies between development cooperation and trade to meet growing needs and lay the foundation for economic growth and entrepreneurship. The green and digital transition brings great opportunities in terms of jobs, growth and solutions to mitigate climate change and achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Emerging technologies such as AI hold immense promise in addressing some of our most pressing common challenges. The global community must support innovation while addressing risks. Mr. President, the UN was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. These words of the second Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, remain just as valid today. These are difficult times, but times have been difficult before. Let us not surrender to despair. Most nations continue to stand by the fundamental principles agreed upon 80 years ago. We should not let this anniversary become a celebration of the past alone. Let's see this as a call to action. Let's embrace the spirit of Pippi Longstocking and carry on with fearlessness and conviction. Together we must act for ourselves and for future generations. Let them inherit a better, freer, and fairer world than the one we found. For my son, Christian, and for my daughter, Kajsa, for all our sons and daughters who deserve to grow up in a world where their paths are not limited by their gender, tradition, or violence. We must not let potential go to waste. We must not let them down. I thank you.
Je remercie la ministre.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Lejeune Mbela Mbela, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Cameroon.
Madam
President, I was entrusted with the honor on behalf of His Excellency Paul Biya, President of the Republic of Cameroon, Head of State, and he instructed me to speak in his name. Allow me, therefore, to renew Cameron's warm congratulations on your election as President of the 80th session of the General Assembly of our organization. Your diplomatic experience and vision, which encourage us to unite our efforts for a better future, are guarantees of success for both your mandate and deliberations throughout this session. You can count in this regard on the full cooperation from the Cameroonian delegation. As you know, my country was honored to see your predecessor, Ambassador Philemon Young, preside over the 79th session of the General Assembly. And I would like here to commend his commitment, his professionalism, and his determination, which was marked by his spirit of being able to listen and conduct a dialogue as he fulfilled his mandate. Let me also reiterate to Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, the sincere appreciation of Cameroon for his tireless efforts at the helm of our organization and for his clear commitment to strengthen multilateralism in an international context which happens to be particularly difficult and complex. Madam President, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General, and distinguished representatives, we meet this year at a pivotal moment for our organization, which is celebrating its 80th anniversary. And anniversaries are usually joyful occasions, but we must acknowledge that this particular one leaves us with questions. This is an opportunity for us to take stock and reflect on how we can make the United Nations more effective in fulfilling its missions and recommendations and promises contained in the Charter. You therefore proposed in this regard, Madam President, that we pool our will, our efforts, and our resources. And you believe, and rightly so, that we are better together. Cameroon shares this vision and welcomes the theme we have chosen for our discussion, which is, I quote, "Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights." End of quote. This theme is more than just a slogan. It is a relevant program that we must translate into concrete actions at both the national and international levels. The union of our forces is the very foundation of the UN Charter. Its founding fathers understood that maintaining international peace and security and promoting economic and social development for all could only result from our collective labor. And that is why we must maintain this dynamic for the well-being of our populations. Madam President, the UN was created to be, at the same time, a beacon of hope, a forum for dialogue, and a catalyst for concrete actions so as to build a more just, safer, and more united world. And 80 years later, it is useful, as I mentioned earlier, it is useful to take stock and draw lessons for the future. So the following questions arise here. Have we succeeded? Have we managed to shield our peoples from the fear of war? Uncertainty about their future? Have we succeeded to shield our peoples from famine? The current international situation, which is marked by numerous crises, offers a clear and negative answer to these questions. Indeed, in 2025, the global security environment remains, unfortunately, characterized by a proliferation of conflicts and threats of all kinds to human security, including the nuclear threat, which we once thought to be a thing of the past. Whether in Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, or Africa, tensions are emerging or persisting, endangering peace, stability, and international security more than ever before. The ongoing armed conflicts around the world are a painful reminder for us that 80 years later, we neither could nor would succeed in protecting the world from the scourge of war. And this situation is further compounded by various natural disasters, including extreme weather events such as storms, hurricanes, forest fires, earthquakes, landslides, which cause significant material damage and loss of human lives, not to mention various pandemics on that list. The world will only meet the challenge of development if it first wins the challenge of peace. We have a historic responsibility to choose. Either we allow war and these multiple scourges to thrive, or we offer our children a stable, united, and prosperous world. And Cameroon has made its choice. It made the choice of peace and development, and stands firmly by your side in order to turn this aspiration into a shared reality. Madam President, Your Excellencies, it is well known that there can be no development without peace, nor can there be lasting peace without development. The ongoing crises, which negatively affect international trade, the cost of raw materials and market supplies, undoubtedly hinder the development of many countries. And yet, economic development through the Sustainable Development Goals, remains a primary objective that the United Nations must attain for the well-being of our peoples. In recent years, however, we have seen with regret that millions of people still live in extreme poverty, facing disease and food insecurity. In this particular context, children, women, and the elderly, and people with reduced mobility are the most vulnerable. And although access to education has expanded, many children and young people remain outside of the school system. At the same time, we observe a decline in life expectancy. We see deteriorating health indicators and a critical shortage of healthcare professionals, especially in Africa. With 5 years remaining until the SDG deadline, it is urgent that coordinated actions be taken to fulfill the promises of the 2030 Agenda. We must indeed take our responsibility individually and collectively so as to achieve these goals that we had freely and voluntarily set for ourselves. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Cameroon, a ward of the United Nations, remains committed to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and spares no effort under the high leadership of His Excellency Paul Biya, President of the Republic, to promote peace and international security. And in this spirit, my country actively participates in UN peacekeeping operations and through its 3 major specialized schools, trains police, gendarmerie, and other African civilian personnel who take part in these operations. Moreover, Cameroon remains consistently engaged in the fight against terrorism in general, in the Sahel, and particularly in the Lake Chad basin, where the Boko Haram sect operates. Now, in economic terms, my country has adopted an ambitious national strategy that promotes harmonious economic and social development across the nation, whilst advancing democracy, respect for human rights, and good governance. This allows us to progressively and systematically realize the Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union's Agenda 2063, among others. Madam President, in the Congo Basin, Cameroon actively contributes to finding solutions to global climate change and to protecting wildlife and biodiversity. He will always do its part and expect that promises made, especially in terms of financing, will be honored. For Cameroon, it is essential that the efforts of developing countries be supported. In this regard, it is worth recalling yet once again that over a decade ago, developed countries pledged collectively to mobilize $100 billion annually to support climate change efforts. The same applies to development aid, which was set at 0.7% over 50 years ago. To date, none of these promises have been fulfilled. Cameroon believes that it is time for these funds, which were expected to be effectively mobilized to support the substantial efforts made by developing countries, especially in Africa, to preserve our shared environment for the benefit of all. On another front, Cameroon is mobilizing resources for major projects in education, health, infrastructure, and rural development, etc., all aiming to bring about structural transformation in our country. We take this opportunity here to thank our multilateral and bilateral partners who support us in this endeavor. And we encourage them to strengthen this partnership to help us achieve our goals. Your Excellencies, the Pact for the Future and its two annexes, namely the Digital Compact and the Declaration for Future Generations, require that we implement them. Similarly, the recent final documents that came out of the Nice and the Seville conferences, as well as the Yaoundé Declaration on Sustainable Blue Economy in the Gulf of Guinea, reaffirm commitments regarding financing and access to technologies, especially in this digital and artificial intelligence era, as decisive factors for promoting sustainable development. Cameroon welcomes these advances and the commitments made during these occasions for reforming the international financial architecture and advancing energy transition. My country aspires very much to see the realization of other long-awaited reforms, notably that of the United Nations Security Council, to allow Africa to occupy its rightful place in line with the Eswatini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. When it comes to human rights, Cameroon welcomes the drafting of the International Pact on the Right to Development. The eventual adoption of this important instrument will mark a milestone in human history by unequivocally affirming that development is a fundamental right and not a privilege. Madam President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at this pivotal moment in the history of the United Nations, we must act. It is imperative obligation that we cannot ignore. This requires, in my view, respecting our commitments to development financing, fulfilling our promises for peace, and ensuring the effectiveness of our choices in human rights and humanitarian assistance. In the years to come, we must strengthen the foundations of lasting peace, rooted in prevention, resilience, and justice. And we have the means to do so. especially now when global wealth in 2025 has reached unprecedented levels and technological development allows for significant improvements in living conditions for all. In conclusion, and as a call to action, we must do better and we must do more so that the United Nations fulfills the promises made to the peoples of the world and becomes more than ever the engine of strengthened multilateralism, fair and equitable cooperation, and reimagined solidarity in the face of the concerning rise of multipolarity. I thank you for your kind attention.
Je remercie le ministre.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Cameroon. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Espen Barth Eide, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. 80 years ago, against the backdrop of the Second World War, world leaders gathered in San Francisco to sign the UN Charter, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This once-in-a-generation moment brought the idea of the United Nations to life. Let us imagine for a moment that we are there in San Francisco in 1945 as the UN was negotiated. Participants who were at my age would have experienced the First World War, the short-lived Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression of the 1930s, fierce trade wars, the rise of fascism and Nazism, the Second World War, the Holocaust and the nuclear bomb. And all of that in their own adult life. If events like these constitute your life experience, you do not believe that the world is a rose garden. Those who shaped the United Nations were not guided by naive idealism. Quite on the contrary, this was a deep realist recognition that mankind simply could not continue as before. Centuries of great power rivalry, competing spheres of interest, and imperialism had not forged peaceful coexistence. The founders, however, were indeed visionaries, as they believed that a better world was possible. Our founders realized that the world needed shared norms and principles in order to avoid yet another world war. They were adamant not to repeat the debacle of the interwar years. This noble insight shaped the United Nations Charter. Simply put, the Charter rests on three sets of principles. Peace and security should be achieved through recognizing the sovereign equality of states, the prohibition of the use of force, and through peaceful settlement of disputes. Economic and social development should be ensured through close international cooperation and through finding common solutions to common problems. The dignity and worth of all human beings should be established through mutual commitment to universal human rights. Our United Nations, imperfect as it is, has since provided an unrivaled global arena for seeking common solutions to common challenges. There is little doubt that the world would have been a more brutal and less prosperous place without the United Nations. Since 1945, interstate wars have been fewer and farther apart. Former colonies gained independence and became sovereign states of their own. Hundreds of millions have been brought out of poverty. President, however, at 80, we find our United Nations in crisis. This crisis is both political and financial. Political, because core principles of the Charter are under threat. The world is more divided, more dangerous, and more unpredictable than it has been for decades. Respect for international law is eroding. Gross violations go unchecked. This, in turn, weakens the trust in our institutions. It is a vicious cycle. The crisis is also financial, because several member states are significantly reducing their economic contributions, and this, in turn, makes it difficult to accomplish the core mission of the United Nations. President, savage wars are raging in several corners of our world. In Sudan, civilians are facing the largest displacement and hunger crisis in the world today. The war in Sudan has been raging for almost 900 days. This is but one of the many horrific wars that receives way too little attention in the power centers of the world, even in this organization. In Ukraine, Russia has violated the most fundamental principles of international law. There is simply no other way of seeing it. Russia's invasion of the sovereign state of Ukraine is a blatant violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. While Ukraine is in its full right to defend itself, as affirmed by Article 51. Norway and so many other states stand firmly with Ukraine's fight for freedom and independence. We do so in solidarity with the brave Ukrainian people, but we also do so to uphold the respect for international law, an interest shared by all states, large and small. In Palestine, Israel is in clear violation of international law. Life in Gaza is living hell. For almost 2 years, we have witnessed extreme levels of death, starvation, forced displacement, and massive suffering. The fact that these atrocities continue is a disgrace to all humanity. In the West Bank, the illegal occupation, settlements, and settler violence continues unchecked. The Palestinian authorities are under massive stress, its finances strained, and its capacity to operate is severely restricted. The war must end now. Massive humanitarian aid must reach those in need now. The remaining hostages must be released now, and the illegal occupation must end now. But, colleagues, there is an alternative to this never-ending cycle of violence. We have made important steps just these past few days. At the Conference on Palestine in this hall on Monday, member states further developed the roadmap to a settlement to the deeper conflict between Israel and Palestine. By now, 159 member states have recognized the state of Palestine as a contribution to the realization of the two-state solution. However, the recognition of Palestine is only one of the elements needed to reach such a two-state solution. There are many pieces in this puzzle. Palestinian governance and economy must be strengthened. Hamas must be demobilized. We need security guarantees to both Israel and Palestine. And key Arab states aim to normalize their relation with Israel as part of a broader agreement. In order to put together these pieces of the puzzle, the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution was launched here in New York last year during the last UNGA. It continues to gather support for a comprehensive settlement. It is our firm conviction that both Israel and Palestine have the right to live in peace and security, side by side in two states. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a world order based on international law is not a luxury, it's a necessity. When we condemn Russia's blatant violations of international law in Ukraine, we must also speak just as clearly against Israel's violation of the rules in Palestine. International law cannot be applied with double standards. It must be upheld universally, regardless of who commits the violations and regardless of where they take place. This is not optional. This is fundamental. We must also defend the institutions that safeguard accountability, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Just as important as the sacrosanct integrity of borders and the sovereign equality of states is our mutual commitment to human rights. The UN Charter commits us to respect and promote these fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction to race, gender, language or religion. Human rights are universal. They are our best hope for a world that rejects injustice, inequality, violence and brutality. A more equal world where women and girls participate on equal footing with men and boys is a more peaceful and a more prosperous world. President, in these times of crisis, the United Nations must reposition itself to meet a new political and financial reality. The UN 80 initiative gives us a unique chance to turn this crisis into an opportunity and to build a United Nations that is not only stronger, but also smarter. As a country with an unwavering commitment to the United Nations, I can say this with conviction. It is time for some tough love. We want a UN that is stronger, yet leaner. A UN that is more efficient. A UN with structures optimized to deliver real impact where it matters most, on the ground, with the people we serve. We need a UN with sharper prioritization of resources, clearer mandates, and a UN that works smarter, not just harder. This is also a moment for self-reflection for all of us as member states and for our United Nations. As member states, we have contributed to a proliferation of mandates, long, complicated, overlapping, and burdened with endless reporting requirements. My country, Norway, is not exempt. We too are guilty as sin. The time has come to change this. We need bold and ambitious reform. We must stand firmly behind the Secretary General to drive this forward. We need a UN that can continue to uphold the rules and the principles that have underpinned our international order for the past 80 years. And we need a UN 80 process with a roadmap for the next Secretary General. When she assumes office in 15 months, she must be able to head the reformed UN fit for the next 80 years. President, we need a global convention on tax cooperation. States have the primary responsibility to provide essential service to their people. Then we must enable states to fulfill this duty. The capacity to tax both citizens and companies is paramount. It is the backbone of public service delivery, the engine of resource redistribution, and the cornerstone of sustainable development. We know what works, but we must assure that it can work for all. Colleagues, let there be no doubt. The climate crisis is real. It is here, it is man-made, and it's affecting the lives of millions of people around the world. As an Arctic nation, we experience some of the fastest paces of climate change anywhere on the planet, and we feel its impacts in our everyday life. The science is irrefutable. Observed warming is outpacing predictions. Curbing global warming and making peace with nature is the greatest collective challenge of mankind. We have no time to lose. Yet over the past decade, the world has achieved significant progress in this area. At COP28 in Dubai, nations united around the goal of phasing out fossil fuels in a just, orderly and equitable manner. Today, countries, regional organizations, companies and investors are beginning to recognize a fundamental truth. Embracing the technologies of the future, low on carbon, high on circularity and responsible resource management, is not an obstacle to growth. It is an opportunity for growth, innovation and a sustainable future. Now we must build on this momentum. COP30 in Belém presents a crucial opportunity to reconnect the climate, biodiversity and pollution agendas into a coherent, integrated approach. President, as we mark the 80th anniversary of our United Nations, let us protect the foundations for peace, human rights and development. The norms and the principles are not the problem. They are just as relevant for the world today as they were back then. What does deserve scrutiny is the system we have established to protect and enforce these norms and principles. And that is what the UN 80 is all about. Let us make sure that these principles apply for all people, everywhere, all the time, so that in another 80 years, future generations do not have to build a new version from the ashes of another devastating world war. It is up to us to find the answers that fit the 21st century. But when it comes to the core purpose, we should take the cue from our founders. We are, indeed, better together.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway. We have heard the last speaker in the general debate for this meeting. We will continue the general debate tomorrow at 9 a.m. in this hall. The meeting is adjourned.